Okay guys, welcome back to another video. We're going to be going over something I think is quite an interesting debate, which is the two things that, there's two sort of choices you have as a young man on self-improvement when it comes to relationships. And lots of people give different bits of advice. So, firstly, there's the idea of just improve yourself to death until you're 30, or like until you've really gone through a huge arc of self-improvement, and then settle down with a woman where you've really done all the hard work? Or is it better to find someone to join you on your journey of self-improvement, and you both sort of improve each other along the way? So this is a really interesting thing, because I think the reason why this is such a confusing topic is that two things are true. So you have advocates of both sides. I'll say something like First Man would say, keep on improving yourself until you're like 30, and then settle down, maybe even later, when you're 35 or something like that. Because you've done all the improvement at that point, and all the improving you're doing is still going to get you a better woman. So, earning more money, getting more fit, learning more about how to dress, like this kind of stuff. It only goes up for a man. Like, you can always build more and more and more up to you're like 40, I guess. So why sort of stop at 25 to get married, or 30 or 35? Like, really eke as much out of it as you can. I think you got someone like Ben Shapiro, who's much more traditional, and he would say, it's good to marry someone when you're fairly young, because this is kind of how things have mostly been, is you marry quite young, and there's something very beautiful about growing up together with someone. So I think there are two things. They're kind of the two perspectives, I think. And the first thing, I think, so we'll just go over the separate problems of each. I would say the first thing about settling down too soon is quite, like, not too soon, but like finding someone to join you on your journey. So the Ben Shapiro perspective on this is, well, the obvious one is it could be construed as settling down too soon, and you never get the best out of your life. The kind of girl that you can attract at, let's say, 21 is not as good as the girl, like, if you held out for a few years, did a lot of self-development, you'd find yourself in a much better position in, say, 25, 30. That's the most obvious disadvantage, is that you never really get the best. Like, you need to build up to a certain level to get to a point where you can attract someone. So that's the main disadvantage, I would say. However, on the other side, I think constantly holding out for the best woman in the world, constantly improving yourself to the best woman in the world, well, for a start, no such thing really exists, and it's very easy, particularly guys, get really distracted by unnecessary targets, like, because you need to optimize things, and once you get into the frame of optimizing everything, you can get to a point where you're overdoing it. And I think this is true of self-improvement, like for girls, and sort of holding out to get the best girl possible, is, like I said, like, no such thing exists. I think this is possibly one thing I criticise Hamza on. He's overly improved him. He's sort of too focused on finding the perfect woman. So, like, obviously, he broke up with his previous relationship to do this, because he wanted, like, it wasn't sort of an ideal. She wasn't living up to the ideal that he wanted. Which I always thought was a mistake, because, like, at the end of the day, a lot of a relationship is going with what you have, and nothing's perfect in a relationship, and they sort of got together in the end, back together in the end. You know, and that seems to be the kind of the reason for it. Obviously, it's not really for me to comment, but that's kind of what I've interpreted from it. So I think you can optimize too much. Like, does it, you know, like a person can always be better. A woman can always be more beautiful, always be more kind, always have those sort of virtues that you want from a wife or a partner. You can always have more of them. There's no real point where enough's enough, you know. And I think humans are just too complex to optimize eternally, you know. So I think you can end up holding out for something that you're never really going to get, in a sense. And I think a big part of being in a mature relationship is accepting the flaws of the person. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, you know, like, does that mean that you shouldn't, like, just settle for what you have? No, of course not. Like, this is the confusing thing, because, and this is what's weird about this argument, is that two things are true. On the one hand, you can't optimize for the perfect girl forever, because you know, it's an idea in your own mind. You have to go with what you actually have. But does that mean you shouldn't have really high ideals for the woman who you're gonna marry and have kids with potentially? It's like, absolutely. I think that, you know, that's probably one of the most important decisions in your life, is who you marry. So, but you still do need to optimize, you know. So it's like, it's a really difficult thing, and like getting the balance between just going crazy at, you know, being realistic, but then also being ambitious. It's really hard to get that right, especially with this kind of thing. But the problem with just constantly improving yourself and then settling down is like what's the point to which you stop? So yeah, and the other thing I think that's problematic about improving yourself until you're really at your peak is that's not really how things always have been. I think, like, obviously, guys would marry older sometimes in Anna Karenina. There's a guy who's married to, like, 35-year-old guy who's married to a 19-year-old, and like, that's not seen as like a bad thing in the book. Like, they're both really well suited for each other, and like, it's a really good good pair, and they're like the sort of heroes of the book, and they sort of complement each other really well. And that's kind of idea of the husband's kind of an idea of someone improving himself to the point of like, you know, his glory is, in a sense. But I think for the large part, people did get together quite young, and I think it's somewhat necessary to grow up with someone. I think there's something beautiful about that. So, yeah, I mean, the only conclusion I've been able to come to with this problem is, like, you have to find yourself somewhere in the middle between the two extremes, where you're not prepared to settle for what you have at the same time. At the moment, but at the same time, you're not sort of getting too carried away with the idea that you're like what you're aiming for, because at the end of the day, you're still rooted in the real world, and you know, you want the best wife you can possibly have, but like, I don't want to say like get carried away, because I don't want to sound like I'm being sort of telling people not to be ambitious, but you do have to be realistic, you know, and like you're no matter how great she is, the person you marry will have flaws, and that doesn't mean you've done something wrong if she does. It doesn't mean you should optimize yourself even more, because I just don't think that's really how it works. I think part of the marriage is like you have flaws. So this isn't really very concrete impression that I've got on this. But the only thing that I think is there's surely a certain amount of self-improvement you have to do before you settle down with someone. And the other thing, I guess, is you never stop improving. So even when no matter how long you hold out, you can kind of always improve yourself in some measurement. But from my own personal perspective, I think you just kind of know. And before then, like, definitely put yourself out there, spend a bit of time, you know. It's not a problem to date girls and stuff like that. But just don't make sure it doesn't take over your life, you know. And then I think you know when to invest. I think it's just kind of, you get a natural instinct for it. So who knows really. But that's the conclusion I've come to. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.